Hey folks, Ryan Kennedy here. Welcome back to the show. I'm joined today by Stan Efferding, who is both a professional bodybuilder and world record power lifter. He's one of only 10 men in the world to ever total over 2,300 pounds in raw competition. And Stan holds the title as the world's strongest bodybuilder. He studied exercise science at the University of Oregon and has worked with a number of really high profile clients and just has a lot of longevity and experience and knowledge in the space of health and wellness, and particularly nutrition, which we're going to dive into with his concepts in the vertical diet. He's a successful entrepreneur, having built up startups. I even saw a clip of you, Stan, on Shark Tank, which is pretty cool. So after that bio, it's pretty clear Stan knows what he's doing. And he leads by example. I mean, he practices what he preach. If you see this guy, he's jacked. And so with that intro, welcome to the show, Stan.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
So I really like the vertical diet you developed and coined. And I'd love for you to explain to the listeners some of the foundational elements of this diet.
Yeah, the vertical diet is really the compilation of everything I've learned throughout my career. You mentioned studying exercise science at the University of Oregon. I was a high school soccer coach. I trained high school, collegiate, and professional athletes for 25 years at the University of Oregon, track and football players, and then numerous professional athletes. And it's kind of, I've also collaborated with a lot of great athletes and coaches. I've been coached by some of the best coaches in the world. And so now as a coach of other athletes, I wanted to make sure they all had everything they needed. Like you said, a foundation, a very comprehensive foundation of things that I wanted them to do to make sure they could become the best athletes they could, as successful as possible. So the vertical diet is really that composition, that compilation of everything from sleep to nutrition to digestion, blood testing, hormones, blood pressure and blood sugar, obviously, cardio and lifting, and even things like compliance and grocery lists and menu plans, and just things to make implementing the program easier. And I just accumulated this information over, decades. Since 1986, I was competing, and I wanted to make sure that all my clients had this information right out of the gate. Of course, I send them a detailed questionnaire and try and find out what their personal goals and what challenges they might have. But generally speaking, the vertical diet is, just kind of helps everybody build a foundation. I say you can't put a 3-bedroom house on a 2-bedroom foundation. And so this is the foundation upon which, once you've, optimized sleep and hydration and nutrition and digestion and all of those things, you can build, whatever you want, whether it's a CrossFit national champion. I've worked with many, whether it's world's strongest men. I've worked with many, NFL football players, UFC champions. It applies to all of them. And we've also made it, adjusted the principles to apply to the general population, the dad bods and soccer moms who are just trying to get, in better shape, improve their sleep and energy and body composition, et cetera. And then longevity, you mentioned. I'm 54 now, and I can still train at a very high level and maintain extraordinary health through many, many years of monitoring my personal health and making sure that I pay attention to all these foundational principles. So, in short, it's highly bioavailable, micronutrient dense, easy to digest foods. Micronutrients is kind of a key term there. I find that a lot of my clients and athletes might be lacking with digestion or micronutrient absorption. And so, we pay attention to all those things. And so not a lot of detail there, but generally speaking, it is a ton of information. My book and my ebook are over 200 pages with more than 500 references to peer-reviewed published research, videos, articles referencing, a lot of I think, the most highly respected academic professionals in the industry. And it's co-authored by a registered dietitian with a PhD. So I've worked hard to make sure the information is scientifically sound.
Yeah, I love this whole vertical lifestyle because it's all interconnected. A lot of people get hung up on one aspect of, training or nutrition, but really in the big scheme of things, you got to look at all these different lifestyle variables that all intertwine with each other. And the one of the main focuses, like you mentioned, is the digestion component. And this is huge. I mean, I work with so many people in my practice. I'd say upwards of 90% of people that come to me have some degree of digestive distress, bloating, fatigue after meals, loose stool, all sorts of gas and other types of fermentation going on in the gut. And, a lot of people think like, oh, it must be, sugar or dairy or, gluten in the wheat. But, they don't really tie it back to some of these quote unquote ultra healthy vegetables being at the root cause of their digestive distress. And I want you to touch on this because I know you really go into this with your vertical diet of looking at a lot of these FODMAP foods and these fermentable compounds that can really cause a lot of GI distress.
Yeah, you're right. It is comprehensive. Even losing significant sleep can have an impact on your insulin sensitivity. The co-author of my book did his master's thesis on IGF-1. And you see, even after one night of 4 hours of sleep or 5 hours of sleep, or even a full night's sleep with apnea is not adequate sleep. And that can impact your insulin sensitivity and have a significant impact on your postprandial glycemia, or the amount of your blood sugar response to eating. Also, chronic dieting, just being in a calorie deficit for too long can have an impact on your gut microbiome and the quality of your digestion. And then beyond that, you mentioned things like gastric reflux. People will be taking antacid medication and not appreciate that you need acid to break down proteins and to absorb minerals. So they become deficient in both as a result of constantly taking either prescription or over-the-counter, Tums or something like that. So we do, right out of the gate, ask those kinds of questions, how their digestion is. If they've visited a gastroenterologist and been diagnosed with a particular eating or digestion problem, diverticulosis, IBS, IBD, then those interventions are commonly starting with an elimination diet, and that is the most often how digestive problems are, it's the pathway to resolving them. And the most studied elimination diet is the FODMAP diet from Monash University out of Australia, fermentable oligodimonosaccharides and polyols. Those foods have, through their research, been recognized to can cause excessive gas and bloating and aggravate people with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. And there's a 60 to 80% resolution of symptoms for people who use the low FODMAP menu. And so, we commonly will start with that as an elimination diet, and then reintroduce foods, allowing them to give us, their feedback as to how they respond. And I have to say that it's not a good food, bad food conversation. It's individualistic. Not everybody suffers from these problems. Some people are like garbage disposals; they can eat anything.
Yeah.
It's dose dependent. How much of these foods you eat can matter, and the FODMAP menu even specifies a third cup of this, up to a half a cup of that. They're very specific, and there's over 100 food items on the low FODMAP menu, so it's not onerously restrictive. So in addition to the individualistic nature and the cumulative nature, I mentioned it was dose dependent. It can be cumulative, meaning kind of like filling a bucket. If it's something like sugar alcohols or histamines, you might be able to tolerate a particular amount of them in the morning, but by evening they've overflowed your bucket, and then you'll start to see the response. And how they're prepared matters. Some cruciferous vegetables can be cooked thoroughly enough so that they're soft to where enough of the cellulose fiber will be broken down and have a less of an impact on your large bowel in terms of creating methane from being broken down and causing uncomfortable gas and bloating. And gas per se is not unhealthy. It might be more unhealthy for people around you than yourself. But there's levels to this. And if it's something that's bothering people, then, we can offer some suggestions in those low FODMAP foods. We have a list of those to be cautious of. And, I mentioned sugar alcohols and, of course, cruciferous vegetables and things like garlic and onions. Not bad foods per se, but how much of them you eat, how they're prepared, and how you tolerate them can make a big difference in your dietary habits and how you respond.
Yeah, that's the key thing, is just that bio-individuality. I remember learning about this many years back, and I thought, man, all these foods are healthy foods. How could they be so problematic? But I saw firsthand when I cut onions and garlic were two of the biggest ones for me
Yes.
personally. I cut those out of my diet, which was challenging because they're used in virtually everything, just from
Yes.
because they bring great flavor and they do have
Yeah.
a lot of healthy qualities. But when I cut those out of my diet, I went from getting, passing a lot of gas in the evenings after dinner to none at all, just from those
Yeah.
two foods were really causing a lot of fermentation for my body. And I've seen it be the case time and time again. And like you said, it is kind of a spectrum. Sometimes people can handle a certain volume of these foods, but you go over that, you cross that line, and then you do get a lot of issues with that fermentation and, the buildup of gas in the stomach, which is not pleasant, especially like you said, for people around you. If you're sitting indoors, it's not an ideal scenario.
Indeed. Two of the big concerns when using an elimination diet, just the main concerns, would be an insufficient amount of micronutrients necessary to thrive: magnesium, potassium, even sodium. If you're not salting your food and you're eating quote unquote healthy, you're not eating fast food, you're not eating a lot of packaged food. So micronutrients is a concern, and in particular, prebiotics and probiotics. Oftentimes, a lot of the prebiotic foods are high FODMAP foods because they're intended to survive the small bowel and make it to the large bowel to feed your gut microbiome, the flora in there. And that's not, that food isn't digested, it's fermented. It's broken down by bacteria and creates methane as as part of the breakdown process. And that's actually healthy for that gut flora. I just have to be careful of the dose and try and make sure you get some, soluble fibers. We include potatoes for that reason. They're a very good prebiotic, and they're also loaded with potassium, twice as much as a banana. And we include some yogurt. And like you mentioned, a lot of people avoid dairy because they've heard it's bad for them. We could spend an entire hour on all the great qualities of dairy and how it's unnecessary to avoid it entirely, depending on your lactose, the amount of lactase enzyme. And so, we use like a Greek yogurt. It's loaded with probiotics. We're seeing, if you look at some of the research by Gabrielle Fandero, vitamin PhD from RP Strength, and now examine.com, we're seeing that not all probiotics, not all fermented foods are the same. Things like kimchi and kombucha might not be providing the digestive benefits that we presumed they would, whereas dairy does. And so different types of fermented foods have now been tested to show that some have, such as fermented dairy, cheese, yogurt, does have a digestive benefit, whereas we can't see much research to suggest that things like kimchi and kombucha and even what am I thinking, sauerkraut, don't really provide that much benefit. One of the big challenges I have with those kinds of things, the probiotics, is that people, I don't know how to explain this best, but they'll eat something they shouldn't eat and then want to eat some probiotics to help that situation. And it doesn't help. It's kind of like, hey, my knee hurts. I'm going to squat, but then I'm going to put some electric stem on it after. And that's the same thing with the gut. You really have to avoid the problem, eliminate the source first and foremost. You can't throw something down after it, thinking that it's going to cure, whatever your trigger is, whatever the source of your problem is. And that's when I think people use those types of foods as some sort of crutch or supposed intervention or medication, if I can say that, to help fix their gut, when really, if they would just take the time to find, and it can be hard to do, their trigger, the source of the problem, the food that's causing the issue, which oftentimes it's many foods. The low FODMAP diet is just one of the best what would you say, kind of the best guide that we currently have, the most successfully tested on the most people to offer benefits. And so we do recommend that kind of out of the gate, but include some prebiotics, include some yogurt. We're cautious about not over restricting, and that's kind of the foundation of those foods. That's why we put them in there.
Yeah, I find that's the case oftentimes with people, is rather than seeking the root cause that's, creating the issue for them, they seek some band-aid solution. And in our, in kind of the natural health space, rather than finding what, foods are causing their inflammation, they're like, oh, I'll just take this curcumin supplement and it'll kind of help, but not really. And, I suppose it's better than like NSAIDs or going a synthetic kind of pharmaceutical route. But in the big scheme of things, you got to look at what's causing the inflammation in the first place. Your body doesn't have some curcumin deficiency. It's not a necessary nutrient for human health. So I see that type of thing all the time. And I'm glad you touched on the fermented foods topic, because I've seen similar things in that the lacto fermented things such as kefir and yogurts and things of that nature do tend to provide more benefits. And the fermentation process seems to make the dairy a little bit easier to digest for people who do have issues with lactose and some of these other dairy proteins. I find the raw dairy is a big difference. I don't know. It varies state by state where it's available. I'm in California, where it's legal to sell raw, unpasteurized, non-homogenized dairy. And there you don't have all the, you have more of those live enzymes. And so a lot of the dairy will have some of that lactase enzyme in there to help break down the lactose. But when you pasteurize the shit out of it with all the processed milk and cheeses and things like that, kind of wipes that out of the equation. So it makes your body have to pick up the slack, so to say. So I'll find that with a lot of people, myself included, if I just have some pasteurized dairy, I'm not doing so hot. But if I have like a raw grass-fed dairy product, whether it be a milk or a cheese, I feel great. I don't have the same issues.
Let me load in, jump on that as well, and say that sometimes if you haven't had dairy in a while, your lactase enzyme will decrease, and then when you eat dairy, you will have insufficient amount of lactase. So sometimes you'll have to titrate the dose to start with a couple ounces for a few days until that your lactase enzyme accumulates. And also, like you mentioned, the fermented dairies, the cheeses, and the yogurts have less lactose in them, and so they're more tolerable. And so we titrate those with our clients. And the big reason is because we're seeing in the literature, we see it in epidemiology in particular, that the populations that consume the most dairy have the longest, have the best health. They have the lowest all-cause mortality, the lowest heart disease, in comparison to those who consume very little dairy. And the proteins are very valuable, particularly for adolescents and teenagers. The protein in milk seems to have an especially, I don't want to say anabolic effect, but we do see a better response to hypertrophy and strength gains in teenagers that are consuming more dairy. And some speculation is that because of its stimulatory effect on IGF-1, and so that can be a benefit. But we look for a variety of proteins. I'm not exclusively I certainly promote red meat in the diet. I promote 30% protein as a percentage of total calories, which we now just recently saw a study suggesting that is superior to even the Mediterranean diets in terms of cardiovascular disease and insulin resistance, because the Mediterranean diet is about 20% protein. So it seems that protein is probably more predictive of long-term health and then secondarily would be, the rest, the fruits and vegetables and that. And I think that we kind of get that turned around. We get that upside down, and we lead with fruits and vegetables and sometimes compromise our protein intake. And so, I promote red meat, certainly whole eggs. We've seen research where we compare egg whites and whole eggs, equating for calories and protein intake in two groups, and one with the whole eggs will have a significantly better hypertrophy and strength response. There was some speculation it was the micronutrients, possibly the biotin or choline or others, but now it seems to be cholesterol. They seem to be thinking that the increased cholesterol has a positive effect on hypertrophy and strength training outcomes, and we're seeing it in numerous studies. Menno Henselman's covered this with a host of studies most recently. So I have a broad range. I want them to get about a gram of protein per pound of body weight or pound of goal or lean weight if they're significantly overweight. And then utilize numerous sources. Even with my kids, I want them to get a gram of protein per pound of body weight from a variety of animal sources, along with fruits and vegetables where I can get them in there. But I lead with the most micronutrient dense, highly bioavailable, protein rich foods. And that's some red meat, much higher in iron, B12 and zinc and creatine and carnitine than chicken, and better fatty acid, profile, omega-6 to omega-3. Obviously some yogurt daily and some whole eggs daily. And then for my, for my omega-3s, I'm taking in 2 servings of wild salmon twice a week. And that gives you about all the omega-3s that's ever been tested to give you a health benefit, aside from maybe a prescription EPA study on, pharmaceutical grade. But aside from that, in terms of food, we throw in 2 servings of salmon a week, and that satisfies your omega-3s. So that's kind of how I round out proteins and the sources that I use. So I'm not exclusively red meat. I don't eschew chicken or pork if you choose to consume it. I just don't think red meat should be excluded. And I think it should be preferentially consumed because of its superior micronutrient density.
Yeah, we really see eye to eye there, Stan. And I'm just not a huge fan of the fatty acid profile of chicken and pork with the higher levels of linoleic acid compared to the fatty acid profile of red meat, where you have a much higher proportion of stearic acid, which just seems to confer a lot more benefits from a metabolic health standpoint. And then, like you said, the micronutrient density in grass-fed beef or lamb or bison, it just blows these white meats like chicken and turkey out of the water, man. It's when people hear me say that, oftentimes if they've been kind of confused with a lot of the mainstream media recommendations, they're like, are you kidding me? Telling me a steak is healthier than a chicken breast? I'm like, 100% yes.
100% yes.
But
it's even better for the environment if you want to make that argument, because
absolutely,
chickens and pigs are monogastric animals. They have to eat human food.
Yep.
Whereas cows, because they're ruminant animals, they can eat in arable land that you can't plant crops on. And they can eat food that we can't eat and convert it into a nutrient-dense meat source for us.
Yep, it really is one of the keys. Regeneratively and holistically managed ruminants are really the key for reversing climate change, despite popular beliefs. On the topic of protein, though, Stan, with your background in powerlifting and bodybuilding, do you find that there's any additional benefit with muscle protein synthesis and recovery and overall strength gains and hypertrophy with exceeding that 1 gram per pound of body weight? Because I've always been under the, based on the reading I've done, it doesn't appear to be, but there's so many anecdotal stories in that space. I know you're deep in that world. So when you're working with a professional powerlifter or a bodybuilder, do you have them exceed that protein?
I'm glad you made that distinction between the literature and the anecdotes, because obviously, when I was coming up in the sport, having started competing in '86, the internet didn't exist, and it was all trial and error and anecdotes at that time. And we put down about 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight pretty regularly, and the research doesn't support that as being any additional benefit. I will say this: there is some research that would suggest that in a calorie deficit, like dieting for a bodybuilding show, it may be wise, not only for the satiety benefit, but for the lean mass retention, potentially, to go up to like 1.2 grams per pound. You get much beyond that. I just don't see that there's much support for it. When you're in a calorie surplus, you have to remember that carbohydrates in particular are protein sparing. And so if I've got someone who's trying to gain weight and they're having a hard time eating enough calories in a day, the most satiating food with the highest thermic effect of food is protein. And so I'll bring that down to 0.8 or 0.7 grams per pound and won't see any loss in their potential gains, because they're in a surplus, and a lot of that surplus is carbohydrates. And it's just easier to consume more of those calories and be hungry again faster. And so those are the strategies that I use. Dieting for a bodybuilding show, I go to 1.2. A lot of it's for the satiety benefit. bodybuilding, figure, physique, bikini. I'm referring to the whole industry there. And then gaining weight, I go down to 0.8 simply because it might be hard to maintain a surplus, and the other calories are easier to consume more of and have a lower thermic effect of food and lower satiety effect. So that's what my recommendations are currently.
Makes total sense. On the topic of satiety, one of the things I've heard you share that I found fascinating, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think I recall you saying, as I was doing some research on you, that oranges are one of the highest satiety foods.
Yeah, you can Google. There are some studies that are done where they have a satiety index, and they feed groups of people particular foods, and then they ask them, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours later, how full they are. And the foods that are highest on the satiety index, proteins, of course, high protein foods are way up there.
Yep.
High protein solid foods, not protein shakes. It's not protein itself. It seems to have something to do with the food. And I've also found that this is another strategy I use. I'll get back to the original question shortly, but another strategy that I use with people who are trying to lose weight is I have them cut and chew steak, whole steak. And people who are trying to gain, because it's more satiating, just mechanically speaking, it takes you longer to eat it. It fills up more space, takes a little longer to digest.
Yep.
People are trying to gain weight. I'll use a ground bison or a ground beef because it's easier to consume more of it faster, and it's got more surface area, and so you're hungry again sooner. And I blend it with rice and bone broth so that it's just mechanically speaking, again, it's just more saliva, and you're just able to consume it faster. And I might even sprinkle a little dextrose on their rice for the same reason. More saliva, more amylase, and maybe even more pancreatic amylase to help break down the starch. So I don't use the dextrose to drive calories necessarily, but just to stimulate the mechanisms in the body that can help consume more food mechanically, and then also chemically in terms of the amylase to break it down into the starch better. So how did I get lost? Back to the original question.
Yeah.
What was that again? Remind me.
Oranges being high satiety food, which was shocking to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's another thing that I do. People who are dieting, I have them eat boiled potatoes and whole oranges, because they're very high on the satiety index, two of the highest foods if you Google the indexes. And people who are gaining weight, I have them drink small amounts of orange juice and eat white rice with dextrose, as mentioned. And those are strategies that seem to be very effective. The orange juice thing, I talked about this over 4 years ago on my seminar that I did in Iceland. It's got almost 7 million views now. And people, a lot of folks responded and thought it was bro science, but now we're seeing a lot of literature suggesting that fructose can actually increase body temperature. We're recommending that people consume both dextrose and fructose for faster absorption and better digestion for training bouts, particularly lengthy endurance events, etc. But I've just found, first anecdotally and then testimonial from my clients, and then I did post some research, that just a few ounces of OJ, I'm not talking about an 8 or 10 ounce glass. Again, I'm not using it to drive calories. I'm just using it to stimulate the liver and to increase body temperature. We find that T4 converts to T3 in the liver, so there might even be some thyroid benefit. I've just seen it in blood tests too. I've seen AST, ALT come down. I've seen appetite go up, thyroid function improve. Of course, I was usually putting in some sort of iodine. I'd usually switch to iodized salt or a little cranberry juice to stimulate thyroid function, especially in dieters getting ready for shows, because they tend to have some slow thyroid function from the diet and the lack of sleep and the overtraining and all of those things. So those are all little methods, little things that I think cumulatively they add up to provide some significant benefits for clients, depending on whether they're trying to gain weight or lose weight. And I just found that to be interesting. In blood tests, people would come to me. I'm in a business, bodybuilding and powerlifting, where there's a lot of guys using performance enhancing drugs. And so I often get blood tests that have, abnormal ranges of a lot of different things. Thick blood, high liver and kidney markers, creatinine, AST, ALT, things like that. And we can sometimes use nutritional interventions to help mitigate some of those problems. And so wherever possible, we do that.
Makes sense. I'm glad that you kind of went into detail about the survey. I guess with the subjective measurements on the studies of satiety, because I wouldn't have guessed, even potatoes, although they are kind of known to help be a real good filler, just because of the lack of protein, lack of fat, easily and quickly digestible starch, it seems like they'd be lower on that scale. Same with fruit, obviously.
But I think the resistant starch, the soluble fiber in them, is part of the thing. Plus, you remember, it's not French fries and it's not potato chips. It's
completely different animal. Yeah. On the topic of French fries, one thing I do want to touch on, because I know you're a big proponent of people cutting out omega-6 vegetable oils. So what are some of your favorite dietary fat sources for cooking and just for general in someone's nutrition plan?
Well, I'll say this, because I have proteins at 30+% of the total diet. A lean protein, like a top sirloin steak or an egg, you might even have to do an egg white blend. Usually you'll get all of your fats out of the protein sources themselves. And so I don't need to add fats to meet my recommendations for fats. Fats are important. It's obviously for A, D, E, and K, and every cell in the body has a lipid bilayer, and you need fats to help digest and move nutrients throughout the body. But I keep fats in at a minimum of 25% of total calories. Once I get below that, I start to see hormonal issues and just kind of general well-being, unless it's the last 30 days before a physique figure bikini competition, and then I'll actually drop fats. I keep carbs in because they drive the performance, the training. And I have to maintain that stimulus to hold on to muscle tissue. So beyond that, I do get 2 servings of fatty fish a week to get my omega-3s. And then, I just don't see any need to add additional fats. Maybe a little bit of olive oil if somebody chooses to cook in that. But I'm not adding a lot of fats. I don't toss in, butter bombs or bacon, or I use lean sources of meats. Otherwise, your fats will start to climb too high and either impair your ability to get enough protein in, or crowd out the carbohydrates that I think are most beneficial for people's anaerobic training, which I lead with even for the general population, because I think weightlifting is more important than even cardio itself. I think weightlifting is cardio if you're doing it with enough intensity to get a result. Obviously, your cardiovascular fitness is going to improve. You're going to be breathing pretty hard at the end of a set that's taken to within or upper to a failure. And about all the cardio I really recommend, unless somebody has a specific demand for that in their sport or performance, or a desire for that in their preferred exercise plan, is the 3 10-minute walks a day, which has a whole bevy of benefits for blood sugars and digestion and blood pressure benefits and cardiovascular fitness. And plus, it's sustainable. If I give a client a 40-minute treadmill session as a prescription for weight loss, not only is it not terribly effective, we're seeing that now in all the literature. More exercise does not equal more weight loss. Exercise's main benefit is really as weight loss maintenance, as an appetite, as a satiety benefit, just to get your 6,000 to 8,000 steps a day. But as for losing weight, it's not terribly effective, and it's not very sustainable. Nobody's going to do that. The barriers to entry are too great. What busy professional with kids is going to come home, change, get in the car, drive to the gym, do 40 minutes of treadmill? It's just not going to happen. So the 3 10-minute walks is something you can do anytime, anywhere, that's sustainable as part of a normal lifestyle. To take your kids to school, walk after dinner, put a little recumbent bike in your living room when you have poor weather, and just knock out 10 minutes of little intervals, little 45-second spins in front of the TV, and do that, for 10 minutes. We've seen it improves, it prevents or reverses type 2 diabetes at twice the rate of metformin, which is the #1 prescribed type 2 diabetes drug in the world. It's twice as effective. Just taking a 10-minute walk within 30 minutes to an hour of eating, they call postprandial glycemia, is blunted by up to 30%. So your blood sugar spike is lower, and the duration of blood sugar elevation in the bloodstream is shorter. So the insulin area under the curve is less. And insulin seems to be the driver of most of these metabolic diseases, the fatty liver, high blood pressure, all of those things.
I'm really glad you touched on that, because I've been preaching this for years and years, and just can't believe people are still exerting so much of their willpower to go run steady state on a treadmill or on an elliptical trainer, when they hate it, it's grueling, and they have this preconceived notion that if it's not challenging, it's not going to get them the results or the benefit. But it's just crazy to think that way, because going on a walk, like you mentioned, all these benefits, and it's freaking enjoyable. Go for a walk out in the sunshine, and you could stack it with, phone calls, or, listening to an audiobook or a podcast, or chatting with a friend. I mean, there's so many ways to build this in as part of things that you're already doing. You're already have some of these calls scheduled. It's like, why sit inside under artificial junk lights on your cell phone if you could go for a walk and be out in fresh air and natural sunlight and get some movement in, which is only going to help with your cognitive performance and energy levels. So yeah, that's a huge thing. And then on the resistance training front, I want to dive there a little bit, because obviously you have extensive background in this, and I'm a huge fan of weight training. I do more hypertrophy work myself than the typical powerlifting strength stuff. But just wanted to hear your thoughts, on typical volume you recommend for general population. I know it's going to be vastly different for a professional bodybuilder, but I wanted you to share your philosophy, because I know you and I agree in that it doesn't take that much.
It really doesn't. I've always said it's twice as hard to gain, half as hard to maintain. And if someone's dieting in particular, you have to do some sort of resistance training to hold on to your muscle tissue, or you'll lose as much muscle as fat. And then when you gain the weight back, which tends to happen faster than you lose it, you'll gain more fat than muscle. And that's that whole yo-yo thing where eventually your body composition changes to the point where you're skinny fat. Now you're suffering from, metabolic adaptations, kind of the biggest loser problem. They gained all their weight back, but their basal metabolic rate was still significantly lower than when they started, because they had lost a ton of muscle and gained back a lot of fat. And so, and fat just doesn't require as many calories for your basal metabolic rate, or for your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. When you are moving, the muscles will burn more calories. So it doesn't take a lot. And this is right out of Brad Schoenfeld's hypertrophy book, which is really great read and easy to read. He summarizes every chapter with takeaways. And there's a chart that Brett Contreras did. He's the glute guy. He's PhD in exercise phys, that I included in my vertical diet ebook on my website, and credit him for it as well. But here's a quick rundown. You'd like to train every body part twice a week. And by that, I mean a push, a pull, and a leg. So any pushing movement, a push-up is going to work your chest, shoulders, and triceps. So you could just do a set of push-ups. Any pulling movement, it could be a row or a chin-up, is going to work your back and biceps. So now we've got push-ups and chin-ups. And then any quad exercise, a squat, a leg press, a leg extension, even going up walking stairs. Sorry, I got you back there?
All good.
Okay. Even walking stairs, something where you're using your leg to, propel a large mass through some range of motion. Even my 91-year-old dad, I got him one of those adjustable chairs, to get up and out of. I'll have him adjust it almost all the way up, and I'll have him stand up and sit down and stand up and sit down through a partial range of motion, because he can't do a full squat at his age. And I got him a little Reebok step, and he can hold on to a railing and just step up on it and step down and step up and step down. And that is sufficient. Or even, sorry, lost again. Or even just holding, like in my garage, I have a little gym set up, and I set a deadlift bar up pretty high up on the pins. So my dad can just reach down to about his thighs, and he only has to move the bar about 5 or 6 inches. Just holding the weight itself is enough, we call axial loading, to delay, the loss of bone mass, which is a pretty, common problem with aging, as well as assist with sarcopenia, the loss of muscle tissue, which is a big problem we see with, like astronauts when they get on and go to the moon. They lose a lot of muscle tissue just because of the lack of gravity. They have to do resistance training. And that often happens as people age. They just stop lifting weights. Twice a week, work every body part. About 10 sets is kind of a minimum effective volume. So 5 sets of push-ups, 5 sets of chin-ups, 5 sets of legs twice a week gets you your 10 sets a week. That's it. Doesn't take very long. And you could even superset the push-up and the chin-up to save more time. Here's one of the kickers. You'd like to work within a couple reps of failure. So if you do 10 push-ups, but you could have done 20, probably not an effective stimulus. That's exercise, not training, significantly enough to trigger the muscles, to give them an adequate stimulus to grow. Those are probably the big 3 in terms of frequency, volume, and intensity. And if I can just get people to participate in, 30 minutes twice a week under those conditions, then I think that they could retain and even gain muscle under that criterion. And there's some other smaller things. This is range of motion, the pace of the rep, but those are much smaller issues, just kind of getting that done. And a lot of that could be done in the garage. But I obviously love to go to the gym, as we discussed with the treadmill thing, that most people don't. That's what gets sacrificed first when they've when they're late home from work, or the kids need to shuttle somewhere real quickly. So that's my recommendation. I think that anybody can and should do that as a priority over even the cardio. That would 100%. Be first.
Yeah, I think the focus really needs to switch from being overly fat to being under muscled, because muscle is it's the key organ that unlocks the whole equation, in terms of our metabolic currency, in terms of aging and longevity, in terms of our endocrine system. It's so closely tied to all these other systems in the body. And when you don't have enough muscle, losing weight, maintaining a healthy weight, being functionally, physically fit, even just taking your groceries in, or putting a suitcase up on the airplane, or picking up your kid, or whatever it might be, you start to really increase your chances for all sorts of age-related chronic issues, chronic illnesses and chronic conditions. And so I think that if, someone has 1 hour a week to exercise, it should absolutely be, 2 30-minute strength training sessions, or 3 20-minute resistance training sessions over any cardio, hands down.
Yeah. It is. It's the organ of longevity. I think others have certainly said that long before I did. It's also a sink for glucose. It's the number one mechanism that you have to absorb blood sugars from the bloodstream in the absence of the need of insulin, as long as you're working it. That's another thing I mentioned in terms of the 10-minute walk after meals. It's your muscles from that walking, or recumbent bike, or whatever it is you're able to do after meals, that's soaking up the blood sugars without the need of insulin being released. So those are huge. Also, I was at Pat Davidson's seminar. He's fantastic. I've been watching a lot of his stuff recently, along with Jordan Shallow, the muscle doc. And they were both doing a seminar in Miami a few weeks ago, and I went down and watched. And he said something really interesting, because the biggest predictor of longevity is VO2 max. The second predictor is strength, lean muscle mass. But the reason that the lean muscle mass might even be more important is because your VO2 max is dependent upon the amount of muscle that you have and can move. And so it's a really interesting, if somebody with a lot of sarcopenia who has very little muscle mass tries to move around, it's unlikely their heart rates are going to elevate to the point to give them a significant cardiovascular benefit in the absence of enough muscle demanding the oxygen.
Yeah,
so
it's fascinating. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And as we wrap stuff up here, Stan, I want to touch on one more big topic, because all the great nutrition and exercise and general health stuff we've shared doesn't really help people if they don't apply it. And I know a large body of your work is all about compliance, all right? Because that's really the name of the game. And so can you share some tips and tricks and just common behaviors that you found particularly effective for driving sustainability and compliance when someone's making changes to their lifestyle?
Yeah, and this has been studied extensively. We have both a study, the Weight Control Registry, which looks at successful dieters, over 10,000 dieters who have lost over 60 pounds and kept it off for more than 5 years. The number one behavior that they all engage in, 98% of them went on a diet. They have a plan. Any diet, doesn't matter. A plan is better than no plan. You have to, this idea of intuitively, winging it, that doesn't work for your checkbook and your bank account. It doesn't work for dieting either. I'm not saying you have to count calories necessarily, but if you haven't learned portion control, and that may take at least initially some sort of measurement process, or at least understanding how many calories are in the foods that you're eating. One of the biggest problems with dieting is that we underestimate our calorie intake by up to 50%. And so do restaurants, and so do labels are off by 20%, and registered dietitians are off by 20%. We overconsume portion sizes, and then just not knowing how many calories are in certain foods that we're eating. If they're cooked in oils, they're invisible to you, but they might add 200 calories to that one plate. And that can add up significantly. So 98% go on a diet. So you have to have a plan. 78% of those people ate breakfast. And that's, pretty important, because now we're trying to convince people they have to intermittent fast or they have to go keto to lose weight. And the fact is you don't. And most successful people don't. It's certainly a viable option if it works for you. We'd like to leave open the opportunity for people to find whatever diet works best for them. I don't want to nocebo people into thinking that some certain diet's the only one that works, and then when it doesn't work for them, they completely give up. I tried keto, it didn't work, so I'm giving up entirely. There's many options, many paths to the same destination, I say. We have to find the best one that works for you. So specifically, when you talk about what kinds of behaviors are most successful, number one is meal prepping. Number one, by far outweighs all the others combined. And this is what we've known in the bodybuilding, figure, physique, bikini industry for decades. Those people are very good at that. They carry around their little Tupperwares, as nauseating as it may seem. They're successful because they weigh and measure all their food, and they only eat what they're supposed to eat for the day. I use the thermos. This thing was life-changing for me. I got a little 24-ounce thermos off of Amazon. They're $20. And I put a hot meal in there because I've ran through more airports in my time with a cold Tupperware meal that I wasn't about to eat, paying the lady at Starbucks $2 to heat it up for me, or, because I travel a lot. And I've had more food rot in those stupid containers over the years, or just become unedible for age. So I use thermos now, and the meals stay hot for 10 or 12 hours. I take them with me everywhere I go, and I'm perfectly satisfied to eat exactly what I want in the quantities that I want, the types of food that feel good on me, so I don't have to do room service or go through the airport trying to find something that's high in protein and low in fat.
So you're talking about like a hydro flask type thermos?
Yeah, just a little double insulated steel. Yeah, they're amazing. Yeah.
And give us some examples of what you would, because I could obviously think of like soups and stews and things like that would work in there, but
yeah, you could put anything in there. I've put steak and eggs in there, and some rice. I like to make my monster mash. I mix up bison with a little scrambled egg and a little bit of bone broth and some rice, and I stir all that up into a mash, I call it. I think my grandpa called it shit on a shingle, or most people's grandpas did. And I'll put that in there, but you could put anything in there. I have a meal prep company. We deliver nationwide. We make low FODMAP meals. They're high in protein and low in fat. And I get a steak and potato and vegetables. Got carrots and squash and zucchini. And I heat that up. And then I get this is one important thing. It's going to cost you an extra $1. You got to get one of those funnels, like a jarring funnel, to put into the thermos so that you can pour all your food in there really easily. I actually travel with mine because I'll take like 8 frozen meals with me when I'm gone for the weekend. I'll just put them in my checked luggage or even in my carry-on. They're just little meal prep meals that I order from a meal prep company, from ours. You can order them from anybody.
And wrap them in a towel. Can you just mention the name of your meal prep company for people who are interested in checking it out? Okay, yeah. Easy. You
can go to stanefferding.com or theverticaldiet.com, and you can order meals nationwide delivered to your door. But I'll just I used to make my own. I'd make monster mash at home, and I'd put it in Tupperwares, and I'd freeze them the night before. And the next morning when I got up to get on the plane, I would take as many of those as I needed, and I would put them in my bag, and they'll stay frozen or stay cold for the day. And then I always stay at a place with a microwave and a fridge, or a little kitchenette, like an extended stay, or one of those kind of hometown suites or something like that. And so I've got all my food for the whole weekend. I wake up the next morning and say, I've got a seminar, and it's from 9 to 5. I eat breakfast. I heat up 2 meals to put into 2 thermoses. and I head off to the seminar, and I've got, my meals, and I don't have to worry about anything until dinner. And, busy professionals can do that. I get a lot of folks that are police, fire, and ambulance, real estate agents, working out of the trunk of their car all day. It's a great way to get through an entire day. I leave the house with two 24-ounce thermos with whatever I want or need to eat that day. Meal prepping, the single most important thing you can do. And that just was a way to accommodate me from having not to carry around, old, cold Tupperware food. Second on that list after meal prepping is tracking. That which gets measured gets improved. Weigh yourself daily. Now, understand, you have to educate people about this because your weight will fluctuate. And your whole day can't be determined. Your emotion for the day can't be determined because you wake up in the morning and you've got 2 pounds of extra water on you and you think you've gained fat. So you have to weigh daily and take the average for the week and then look at those averages week over week at the end of the month to see if you're increasing or decreasing in weight as suspected. In the absence of some measurements, you're just not going to be able to stay on task if you're not, weighing in. And that kind of gets you to your third piece. And I have all my clients send me pictures of their meals, their morning weight, their hours of sleep on a daily basis. So I have that information if they're my client. And you can track those yourself. I haven't competed in 7 years, and I still have a spreadsheet that I print out. It's got the days of the month across the top. In the left-hand column, I've got a list of things that I want to make sure I do every day. Hours of sleep, morning weight, 10-minute walks, how many meals I eat, whether I'm taking vitamin D or magnesium or anything that you're supposed to do on a daily basis. And it's just a compliance sheet. And I can take a glance at it at any time and recognize whether or not I've optimized everything I need to do to achieve whatever goal that I have at the time. So I ask my clients to do the same. Third on that list is a coach. Everybody should have a coach. Even 20 years into competing, I was hiring and working with great coaches. Flex Wheeler, I went down to Sacramento and trained with him, or San Jose, and trained with him. Mark Bell out in Sacramento, Eddie Cohn out in Chicago, Charles Glass down in LA. I've worked with a lot of great coaches over the years. I've learned something from all of them. But a great coach or, a spouse that's very supportive, or a training partner that's consistent with common goals, not the one that's like, oh, you can have just one piece of cake.
Yeah.
And you can, but you don't need people around sabotaging you all the time when you shouldn't, and maybe only half a piece. Okay. I'm not suggesting that you can't have a piece of cake. I'm just saying that you've got people constantly around you that aren't supporting your goals, distracting you, or encouraging you to do something so that they don't feel bad.
Yeah. Defeats the whole purpose of the accountability.
Yeah. So those are the top three. Get a coach. It doesn't hurt. Your compliance greatly improves as a result. I think if everybody, implemented those three things, meal prepping, daily tracking, and having a coach or someone in their corner helping them through this process, and then utilizing some of those other things that we mentioned, the high satiety foods, the higher protein, just those kinds of things. At the end of the day, we don't have a lot of tools in our toolbox. It's hard. You're going to be in a deficit to lose weight. And so you're going to be hungry. It's just trying to mitigate the degree of hunger. And willpower is not a good way to get through this battle. Psychologically speaking, it's not a winning strategy. I just don't have enough willpower. I'm just not disciplined. You just need to have some strategies to help reduce the amount of willpower you need. And that was the high protein, high satiety foods, support group, all of that, because you can't do it alone, and you can't, be hungry all the time or exhausted and poor energy. And I'll throw one more thing in here in terms of exhausted and poor energy. And we talked about people thinking they had to go out and run 5 miles a day in order to lose weight, and how ineffective that was and not sustainable. More exercise is not equal to more weight loss. It can also cause what we call compensation. If you go out and try and crush yourself to lose weight, and this whole exchange of calorie, exchange working out for donuts or whatever the method may be, those people end up getting tired and then coming home and they sit more and they eat more. their appetite actually increases and their non-exercise activity thermogenesis decreases. And so that's a bad way to look at a bad strategy for weight loss.
I completely agree. I really like to find that minimum effective dose and understand more is not necessarily better.
No.
Depending on the person, what they're doing, their goals, obviously, if you're training for a specific event, it's much different, but for the general person, just who wants to feel better, look better, drop a few pounds, build some muscle, improve their body composition. These are really dynamite tips and strategies. So thank you for sharing all this, Stan. Thanks for coming on the show today. In closing, where can people go to learn more about your work? I'm going to put some links in the show notes, but if you don't want to just verbally mention, social media, website.
Everything's at Stan Efferding. My website, stanefferding.com. My Instagram is @StanEfferding. I've got some great rants on YouTube under Stan Efferding as well, where I talk about all of these things, obesity and a host of other topics. And that's pretty much it. You can find me everywhere. And the vertical diet that we discussed today, I do have an ebook. It's over 200 pages on my website at stanefferding.com that can be downloaded. And the book, the vertical diet book, I got a copy right here, shameless plug. The vertical diet book was the #1 new release in diet books on Amazon for the 4 weeks it was in the category. And now it's in Barnes & Noble and on Amazon as well if you want to get the book.
Incredible. I definitely recommend it for anyone listening in, and appreciate you coming on, Stan.
Thanks for having me, brother. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you found it helpful, please share it along to anyone else you believe it can serve. You can submit your own question to be answered on the show by going to ryankennedyhealth.com/podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review for the show. Your feedback helps to support me on my mission to positively impact as many people as possible with this information. Please note, the information depicted in this episode is purely for informational purposes only. Please consult your healthcare professional before making any changes to your lifestyle or routine.